It's the fourth day of rain, and for your ancestors, this was the most dangerous time. Not because they had to go outside, because they couldn't. Today, when it rains, you treat it as a pleasant excuse to stay in. But 50,000 years ago, a full week of rain locked an entire group of people into a cramped, dry space with the food running down and the time running out, while the whole world closed in around them. Start with why rain was so dangerous. Rain didn't just make life uncomfortable. It compressed the entire world. The caves and rock shelters where people lived usually sat at the base of hills or near rivers, exactly the places rain drove everything toward. Humans, predators, prey, all squeezed into the same few square meters of dry ground at the same time. And inside that compressed space, the rain could kill you 3 different ways. The first is cold. A wet human body loses heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. Without waterproof clothing, all it takes is the temperature dropping below mild, and your core can slide into the danger zone within hours. The second is water. Archaeologists have found layers of flood mud right inside caves that people were living in, meaning the water came in while they were still there, and some of those caves were never used again after the mud settled. The third, and the worst, is predators, because rain drove leopards and hyenas into those same dry pockets. At some cave sites in South Africa, human bones and leopard bones lie in the same layer of earth, and on a few of those human skulls, there are puncture holes that match the canine teeth of a leopard exactly. Let that sit for a second. You're not afraid of the rain. You're afraid of what the rain herds in to sit beside you. But before any of those 3 threats, there was something that could kill you far more quietly, letting the fire go out. Here we need to be precise because most people get this wrong. Humans used fire very early. At Qesem Cave in Israel, there's evidence of controlled fire going back around 400,000 years. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, that number may stretch close to 1,000,000 years. But keeping a fire that already burns and making one from nothing are 2 completely different skills. For most of human history, most people probably could not do the second one. We honestly don't know for certain when humans began making fire reliably from scratch. That's still a gap in what we understand, but it's exactly that gap that made keeping the fire a matter of life and death. If your fire went out, you might not be able to relight it. You'd have to go and borrow a glowing ember from another group, sometimes far away, and carry it home wrapped in fresh leaves or tucked inside a kind of woody fungus that smolders for hours. It was a living lighter, and we know this isn't a guess. When they found Wadley, the man frozen in the ice of the Alps 5,300 years ago, he was carrying a complete fire kit in his belt pouch. Flint, iron pyrite to strike sparks, dried fungus for tinder. Even 5,300 years ago, losing your fire was serious enough that people carried backup equipment. So when the rain hit, the first priority wasn't a place to sleep. It was the fire. Move it deeper into the cave, split open a wet log to reach the dry core inside, peel the bark off a birch tree, bark that holds a natural oil that catches even when it's damp. But fire only keeps you warm. It doesn't fill your stomach. So when it rains for 7 days and you can't go out to hunt, what does the group eat? Your ancestors didn't live meal to meal. At Qesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists found evidence from 420,000 years ago. People cracked out bone marrow, wrapped it in hide, and stored it. And that marrow stayed nutritious for up to 9 weeks after the animal was dead. A bank of fat hanging ready for the hungry days. They also smoked and dried meat on racks, because smoke both kills bacteria and stops fat from spoiling, a method already in use around 20,000 years ago. And at Ohalo II, a 23,000-year-old camp on the Sea of Galilee, archaeologists found tens of thousands of seeds and fruits stockpiled, along with a stone slab for grinding wild grain. So when the rain came, the cave wasn't a starvation trap, it was a pantry. Your ancestors didn't survive the week of rain. They prepared for it weeks in advance. The fire was holding. The stomach had something to run on, but you were still trapped. And a trapped mind will not sit still. So what do your hands do with those empty hours? They make things. Inside these caves, archaeologists find tiny chips of stone, the debris that flies off when you shape a tool, clustered exactly where a person would sit by the firelight and work for hours. But it wasn't only stone. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, they found a pigment workshop 100,000 years old. Abalone shells used as mixing bowls. Ochre ground into powder. Bone used to stir it. That's not basic survival. That's production. With a recipe, with a system. Then the precision climbs. Bone needles start appearing around 61,000 years ago in South Africa. But the oldest complete needle with an eye that we've ever found is at Denisova Cave in Siberia about 50,000 years ago. And it wasn't made by people like you. It was made by the Denisovans, an extinct branch of the human family. A needle less than 8 centimeters long, with a tiny hole drilled at the top to thread through. You don't carve a needle like that while you're running from something. You carve it sitting still, with hours to spare. And that needle changed something bigger than you'd think. If it were only about staying warm, people could have wrapped themselves in hide without any careful stitching. An eyed needle lets you sew clothing that fits the body, joined from pieces decorated. Those rainy days didn't just produce clothing. They produced the first idea of dressing as a way of telling other people who you are, but to join anything together. They needed an invention so small you've never noticed it. One that nearly every later technology hangs from. They needed string. We almost never think about string. But try. At a Neanderthal site called Abri du Maras in France, they found a fragment of 3-ply twisted cord still stuck to a stone tool, dated to somewhere between 41,000 and 52,000 years ago. It's the oldest direct evidence of string humans have ever found. And it was made by Neanderthals, the very people who were dismissed for so long as the dull ones. Think about what that took. You cannot twist a 3-ply cord without understanding pairs, sets, and repeating an action in the right order. That little scrap of string is the fingerprint of a mind that can count. And at Hohle Fels Cave in Germany, they found a tool made from mammoth ivory, about 40,000 years old, over 20 centimeters long, with 4 holes, each one carved with precise spiral grooves for twisting plant fiber into rope. Someone sat in that cave, in the middle of the rain, and built a rope-making machine, because string changed everything. It let you bind a stone blade to a wooden handle, set snares, weave nets, build better shelters. An enormous amount of what humans went on to do hangs from a piece of string. With tools and with string, they began to do more than shelter in the cave. They made it a home. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found the thing you'd least expect from 77,000 years ago. A bed. Layers of sedge and grass compacted into a mattress, and laid over the top, leaves from the Cape laurel tree, a plant whose natural compounds repel and kill insects, including mosquitoes. The old bedding was burned off from time to time to clear out the pests, and a fresh layer laid down. In other words, 77,000 years ago, your ancestors had a mosquito-proof mattress that changed itself, while you sometimes still can't be bothered to change the sheets. When all the practical work was done, when the tools were sharpened, the string was twisted, the bed was laid, and the rain still hadn't stopped, people did something no one forced them to do. And it was the biggest leap of all. They painted. At Chauvet Cave in southern France, there are paintings around 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, rendered with an understanding of anatomy and movement that still stuns people today. At Sulawesi in Indonesia, cave art dates back at least 45,000 years, among the oldest in the world. But here's the detail worth noticing. Those paintings usually aren't near the cave mouth where you'd sit to shelter. They're deep inside, sometimes hundreds of meters, through narrow gaps you have to crawl to reach. Someone carried a fat lamp into total darkness to paint. Nobody does that when the weather's fine and the hunting is good. You do it when you can't go outside. And here's the evidence that turns this from guess into something firmer. In 2022, a study in the journal PLOS ONE examined about 50 engraved stone plaquettes left by Magdalenian people at a site called Montastruc. Along the edges of many of them were pink heat marks, a sign they'd been placed right beside a fire. When the researchers reconstructed that scene, they found this. Under flickering firelight, the animals carved into the stone appeared to move. Legs seemed to stride. Heads seemed to turn. Let this number sink in. Your ancestors created moving images roughly 20,000 years before humans invented cinema. And they did it in the hours spent gathered around a fire, while outside it kept raining. Was it ritual, or just a way to pass a long, wet night? We don't know for sure. Maybe that line was never as clear as we imagine. And then, from that same firelight, something even larger than art grew. What happens when 20 people are locked together in one space for days? They talk, they listen, they tell. In 2014, the anthropologist Wiessner published a study in the journal PNAS comparing 174 day and night conversations among the Juwansi of the Kalahari Desert. By day, people talked about practical things, land, resources, grievances. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of the talk shifted to storytelling, songs, and ceremony. Firelight changed the very content of what people said to each other. And what was shared around the fire wasn't small talk. It was where the water is in the dry season, which plants you can eat, how to track a particular animal. It was survival knowledge flowing from one mind to another through speech. The stories of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, describing a rise in sea level around 7,000 years ago, have survived for 7,000 years purely by being told and retold. That kind of memory doesn't form unless people spend countless hours sitting together and telling it. And where did those countless hours come from, if not the days they couldn't go outside? Then the rain stops. But rain was never only the enemy. Because after a heavy rain, the ground turns soft. And soft ground holds a perfect track, so deep and clear, you can read which animal just passed, which way it went, how fast it moved. Rain also leaves clean water pooled in the hollows of rock. Mushrooms rise, tubers pull more easily from wet soil, and termites swarm. One of the richest sources of protein there is, and you only have to pick them up. Rain didn't cut off the food supply. It changed it. And the groups that could read that change lived far better than the ones that couldn't. So what did your ancestors do when it rained all week? They kept the fire alive. They sharpened tools. They sewed clothing. They twisted string. They painted on stone. They told the stories that carried knowledge across generations. Almost everything we call civilization grew up in the days when people could not step outside. And here maybe is the thing worth sitting with. The great leaps of our species weren't born in the easy days, when the belly was full and the sky was clear. They were born in the forced stillness. The hours you couldn't go out, when there was nothing left to do but sit by the fire and think. So the next time it rains all week and you look out the window and feel trapped, remember this. Your ancestors sat in that exact place, listening to that exact sound beside a trembling fire. They weren't killing time. They were building the world that would one day have you in it. You didn't invent any of it. You inherited it.